Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is the next installment of the incredible series by LaFountain. As ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. Entitled Tracks, Haunted Warrior, Chapter 5. Let's get straight into that. A week later, Blaine was hauling kegs and assorted bottles of beer for Thomas Pruitt. He picked up a load in Olympia on Mondays and Thursdays and returned home. Tuesdays and Fridays he made the run from Shelton to Hoodsport. He began the trip about 8 in the morning, and depending on how long he had to spend unloading at the mining store in Potlatch, he arrived at Ernest's place around 3 or 4 in the afternoon. He made the return trip home the next day to avoid driving any part of that road in the dark. He broached the subject of sciatic with his mother, but found her reticent on the subject. She told him it was just a story the grandmothers used to scare the children with, or to entertain white people. Her answer sounded evasive, and a touch of fear lurked in the back of her voice. "Son, aren't you a little old for fairy tales?" His father scoffed. "Simpson Timber has crews logging all over the peninsula, and no one has ever seen any giant creatures roaming the woods. Well, if there was anything like that out there, they would have seen it." His first trip to Hoodsport went well enough until he reached a plank bridge. As he approached, a crawling sensation began just below his shoulder blades and slowly spread upwards. He studied the trees along the road, his eyes boring into the dark spaces between the pines and maples. He saw nothing to account for the feeling, and finally convinced himself it was his own mind playing tricks with his fears. And coming or going, rain or shine, every time he approached that one-lane plank bridge south of Potlatch, dread stole over him. He had been on the job for 3 weeks and never encountered the creature again, nor had he seen any signs of it. Neither had he hinted of the encounter to Ernest. "Probably long gone by now," he told himself. "Ernest said they migrate." On his 4th trip north, he was to learn that he had deceived himself into a false sense of security. The usual crowd waiting for the beer wagon to arrive at the store in Potlatch was missing, and when he asked the storekeeper about it, the man simply shrugged. "They say some Indian girl disappeared from town," he said. "She probably just ran away back to their place on the Skokomish. They're always doing that and causing a big stir for nothing." "When did she go missing?" Blaine asked. "I don't know. In the night, I guess. She wasn't in her bed this morning, according to Joe up at the office. That's a bunch of fuss over nothing, if you ask me." Blaine got the beer unloaded and watered the horse. The job didn't require a lot of brain power, and he handled the load with one hand easier than he first thought. It wasn't the kind of job that was going to take him somewhere in life, and that was fine. He had been somewhere, and no longer had the desire to travel, and, except for the creepy feeling whenever he crossed the bridge, he thoroughly enjoyed the solitude of the open road. His parents certainly didn't mind him helping with the mortgage, and Ernest was glad to have his company at the other end. He felt no need for more than that. As he rounded a bend and started down the stretch leading into Hoodspot, he could tell something was wrong. Ironically, it was the opposite problem he encountered in Potlatch. Ernest's store was usually empty when he arrived on Thursdays. That day, there was a crowd of people standing in the doorway. He reined in the horse about 10 yards from the store front, tied up, and pushed his way through a dozen people to get inside. A middle-aged couple stood at the center of the counter, surrounded by half a dozen stern-looking, grey-haired men. Ernest saw him and waved him over to stand behind the counter. And Blaine could see that the woman across from him was crying, and the man at her side had a worried look on his face. "No," one of the elders said. "Don't. You will put the whole community in danger. You know what can happen if we interfere." Interfere, Ernest countered. The man's daughter is missing, and you know that they are the ones who are responsible. We saw tracks, another one of the men replied. We are not blind, and we're not foolish, but you must let this go. Besides, no one will go with you, Ernest. You know that. Now Blaine nudged Ernest with his elbow and gave him a quizzical look and a quick shrug of his shoulders. The Seatic took this man's daughter last night, Ernest replied. He came here to ask me to go after her. And these elders of the council, they don't think I should go. They fear retribution from the Seatic. What are you going to do? Blaine asked. Yes, Ernest, an elder said. What are you going to do? Will you listen to reason, or are you bent on this foolishness? What can I do? The girl is my kin. Ernest threw up his hands and he turned to Blaine. Will you mind the store? No. Blaine's voice was flat. I'm going with you. They said no one else will go. I will. There, you see? The girl's father said to the elders. The beer man will go. You must let them try. If they don't find her, then our sorrow is full. But don't kill our hope. What about your wagon and your job? Ernest said, turning to Blaine. They will fire you before you get good started. I'm not due in Olympia until Monday, Blaine said. Give us 3 days. Please, the father pleaded. Please, Ernest Duckers. Hell. You folks wait right here for just a moment more, Ernest said to the couple before shouting over their heads at the crowd by the door. You people, outside. Get this man's wagon unloaded. Blaine, you come with me. He led the beer man away through the kitchen and into his room in the back. The crowd was dispersing some, but Ernest spoke in a near whisper. You don't know what you're saying. Didn't you learn in the army not to volunteer? Sure, I heard that, but I never entirely bought it. This is not a story I'm telling you about a fire in my front yard. This is real. These creatures are real. I know they are, Blaine told him. He took a hold of Ernest's arm and looked the old man in his eyes. I know. Ernest stared at him for a long moment, glanced down at the hand on his arm and back to Blaine's eyes. He took a deep breath and nodded. Stay here, he said. A shout of tearful joy told Blaine the woman knew that the search was about to begin. No matter what he'd said to the store owner a moment before, Blaine was already regretting his volunteering. But the feeling passed as quickly as it came. There had to be a middle ground between shrugging a girl off as nothing and letting fear paralyze everyone. He saw the mother's pain. Somebody had to do something. And once again, he was the somebody to go do what others dared not. Oh, hell. He chuckled to himself. I should have been dead already anyway. Ernest came back into the room far enough to give a fast jerk of his head, calling Blaine to the kitchen. I will take your wagon as far as Potlatch this evening and camp there tonight. I have somebody to drive the wagon back to Shelton from there, he said. Let's start gathering our gear. Why are we stopping at Potlatch? Blaine asked. Actually, her family works in Potlatch, but they live a bit south of town. They came out here to me for help. Sada, are you okay, son? Blaine wasn't quite sure about the answer to that, or if he could answer at all at the moment. South of Potlatch, south of Potlatch, south of Potlatch. He nodded weakly, and Ernest left him to go put together a couple of bedrolls. South of Potlatch. The word still echoed in his head. Though no one told him, he knew where the family lived. It was near a wooden plank bridge. He had seen a little white house tucked back in the trees about a quarter mile from the bridge. He struggled with the memory, shrugged it off the best that he could, and went in search of Ernest. A high, warbling cry assaulted Blaine as he stepped out of the store onto the porch. He looked up to see a short, black-haired lady charging at him. Without slowing, her head hit him in the chest before he could ward off the blow. Her arms locked around him, holding him awash in a sea of her tears. Thank you, the woman wailed. Thank you for my daughter. God bless you. Thank you. His eyes suddenly clouded. A lump rose in his throat, though he tried to force it down. A series of scenes played in his mind. A lonely dock, and a string of empty rail platforms. An empty sleeve, and no one weeping in thanks. A tear rolled down his cheek, and he did not bother to wipe it away. "All right, Alice," he heard Ernest say, and felt the man's hand slap him on the back. "Turn him loose now, so we can get going. Don't just stand there. Help me get this loaded, young man." They threw bedrolls and a couple of handmade backpacks into the back of the empty wagon. Alice's husband Bob helped her onto the tailgate, then jumped up beside her. Blaine took the driver's seat with Ernest beside him. "What about the store?" Blaine asked. "One of the elders, the one who was least dead set against me. He agreed to look after it," Ernest replied. "Said he thinks it might be safer here, anyway." Blaine snapped the reins, and they started back down the road he had travelled a short time before. The road that would take them to a little plank bridge, and the monsters beyond. Chapter 6. They camped that night in the dooryard of the missing girl's parents. Blaine found out that her father was a close relation of Ernest's. After dinner, provided by the grateful mother, they bedded down in the front yard beside a small fire, meaning to be underway at first light. On the cusp of sleep, Blaine heard a distant, mournful howl, unlike anything he had heard before. It began in a low bass, rumbling and built to a wild, whooping sound. He glanced over to see Ernest propped up on one elbow and with an ear turned to the mountains west of where they lay. The sound rose again, louder and stronger, and he saw Ernest's brow draw together in a look of worry. "What is that?" Blaine said. "That's not no wolf, not no coyote either." "No, it's not. It's a warning," he replied. "The Seatic?" Ernest slowly nodded, his ear still turned to the west. And frozen by concentration, he continued to listen for a few more minutes before dropping back down onto his bed. "I think that's all," he said. "Let's get some sleep." And Blaine stared up at the stars flickering between the tall pines, but the only sounds he heard were the wind in the tops of the trees, the muted chirp and croak of the night song, and Ernest's soft snore. He felt a strange mix of anxiety and eagerness, a doubt-laced snoring of uncertainty and, against all reason, a desire to encounter the creature again. That played in the background behind concern for the girl's safety. "Quit calling her a girl," he told himself. "She has a name. It's Lily." With a picture of a delicate white flower holding his thoughts, he drifted off to sleep. They awoke under the feeble grey light infusing the eastern sky, to the song of loons on the canal. Blaine rubbed his eyes and stretched his limbs that he had to soon grow unaccustomed to sleeping on the ground. The rain stayed away overnight, as Ernest had predicted, but Blaine could make out clouds forming on the horizon. He quickly tied his bedroll to his pack and shouldered it. Ernest handed him one of a pair of Colt revolvers and a Winchester lever action that he pulled from a oilcloth bag. Ernest held a finger to his lips and motioned for Blaine to strap on the sidearm. They left the yard in silence and slipped down the road without a goodbye to their hosts. "Just in case," Ernest said, pointing at the weapons. "There's more out there than the Seatic, you know." Blaine nodded. "So, when do you plan on telling me what happened to you?" Ernest asked. "When I can tell it without sounding crazy, I suppose." "Do you think you're crazy?" "No," Blaine answered and chuckled. "But sometimes I wonder." "Well, lay that wondering to rest," Ernest told him. "We have a way to go to the spot where the elders found the tracks. Entertain me." After hearing Blaine out, Ernest remained silent for a few moments. "That's quite a tale," he said finally. "I didn't see any sign of that bridge when we crossed. We'll keep on to the Skokomish and follow it upstream for a while." As they walked along, Blaine watched Ernest from the corner of his eye. They went a couple of miles before he decided the old man had accepted his account. He wasn't sure whether to be disappointed or frightened by that prospect. They kept a steady pace, covering the 4 miles to the river in an hour, and a half. The sun was over the treetops, but the dense foliage kept the game trail they found in constant shadow. A field of river rock separated the trees from the waters. Ernest led him across the rocks to the sand at the river's edge in search of some sign the Sasquatch had been fishing. A few dead salmon perfumed the bank as they lay rotting on the shore. Ernest stepped into the river, the water to his ankles, and started walking against the current. And Blaine waded into the cold water with a shrug and set out in his partner's wake. Now the going was slow, the footing tricky at times, as they scanned the trees and the soft sand of the shore. Blaine guessed they had gone a half a mile when Ernest pointed at the bank and angled that way. The footprint had been 18 inches long and pressed into the sand 3 inches deep. The print dwarfed Blaine's boot when he stepped alongside it. 4 feet away, they found another. The tracks led away from the river towards the trees. Ernest led the pursuit. They worked their way through to reconnect with the game trail that followed the course of the river and continued to move upstream. And Blaine was soon lost in the surrounding magnificence. He had lived in that area most of his life, but he had never really seen it before. Not like that. The crystal waters rushed by, tumbling over the rocks in ripples and bubbling up white foam as the current played a steady song upon the stones and the fallen trees. Above him, maple leaves, twice the size of his hand, rustled on the breeze, and small gold and brown birds flitted between the branches. Beyond the treetops, the mountains rose into the sky. A sense of awe at all this beauty spread out before him brought a warmth that touched his heart. And while Blaine marveled, Ernest appeared to do little more than just watch the trail, stopping to inspect the small branches that spread into the way. He told Blaine that he kept an ear to the surrounding air. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, where a circle of sunlight threw a halo on the tall grass, and picking up a piece of broken limb. It was a couple of inches in diameter and 3 feet long, and to his amazement, Ernest took a length of wood in both hands and swung it against the tree. He repeated the move several times before he let the stick fall. He stood there, and then with an ear cocked towards the mountains. "What was that about?" Blaine asked. Some people believe the Sasquatch communicate that way," he explained. "I thought we might get an answer if they were near. It's worth a try. Are you ready for a rest?" They sat in the shade at the edge of the clearing. Ernest took some bread and 2 cans of beans from his pack. He placed the can on the ground and put a point of his knife at the top, and drove the blade into the can with the palm of his hand. He worked the knife around the can, pried back the lid, and handed it to Blaine. He washed down the beans and bread with water from his canteen, and then it was time to move again. They continued to follow the river, keeping to the trail as the sun passed from overhead down to the line of the peaks. The twilight took on an added gloom as a blanket of thick clouds spread themselves across the sky. "We better think about making camp," Ernest said a short time later, and with a look towards the heavens. "Otherwise, we're going to get wet." Blaine gathered wood for a fire, while Ernest set up the tent halves as a shelter against the coming rain. Their gear safely stowed away, they returned to the river to do some fishing for their supper. Darkness chased them back to camp, but not empty-handed. They had a pair of nice salmon, cleaned and ready for the fire. The flames danced in the confines of the small pit they dug, and Blaine and Ernest stretched out next to the fire and talked of the places they'd been. Ernest told him about Cuba, and Blaine talked about France. They spoke about sergeants and captains and the men and women, but neither mentioned the reasons they were there by the campfire, nor did they speak of the horrors of war. Regardless of the advances in the means of killing, war is always the same. The moon was up behind the clouds when a steady drizzle began to fall. The 2 men crawled under the canvas shelter onto beds of tall reeds. Outside, an owl called to its neighbour. Ernest bolted up, grabbed his shotgun, and scooted to sit cross-legged in the tent door. "What?" Blaine asked. "That wasn't an owl," came the answer. And Blaine sat up and reached for his rifle. The forest turned silent as stone around them. The frogs singing at the river's edge, the crickets they chased, even the whisper of the breeze stopped speaking. The silence took on a physical presence, a weight that laid itself on their shoulders and crawled over their skin on a million tiny feet. At one with the world around them, the men did not move, made no sound except hurried breaths that they took. They waited, and listened, hoping what was outside would go away. And gradually, the creeping sensation that ran up and down Blaine's back, it faded. A fish splashed in the river, frogs croaked, and the crickets filled the night air with their melody. Ernest crawled from the shelter. In spite of the drizzle, he built up the fire and made a circuit of the camp before coming back inside. Whatever it was, it's gone, he said. What do you mean, whatever? Blaine said. You know what it was. Yeah, but it's gone now, Ernest told him. Let's get some sleep. I still have a question. If we do this and sit in our tent when it comes around, how are we ever going to take the girl, Lily, from it? I'm assuming, of course, that she's even alive. What good is that shotgun going to do you, anyway? I didn't load this gun with shot, Ernest began. These are solid slug loads. If I have to use it, it will do considerable damage. As to the rest, honestly, I hope they get tired of us chasing them and just let her go. Whatever thinking they do, they seem to prefer to do it alone and in peace. But they could decide we don't scare easily enough and just kill us, right? There is that possibility, Ernest said. I've never seen one. What do you think? I don't know why I'm still alive. And Blaine's voice trailed away to a whisper. Well, there you go. Did you want to turn back? No. What do you mean by, there you go? There I go? What? Neither of us knows what they will do. They? You didn't think there was only one, did you? Now, go to sleep. Chapter 7. Going to sleep proved easier said than done. When Blaine opened his eyes to the soggy morning, it felt to him like they had just closed. Ernest was milling about outside the shelter, and the air smelled of coffee. Blaine crawled out into the damp morning air to sit beside the fire. The slow rain of the night before was gone, though the clouds rode low, thick, and wet above them. Smoke from the fire lay in a lazy haze around him, stinging his eyes and nose with its sharp, acrid scent. He sipped his coffee, aware for the first time since he had left for France how much he loved and missed his home. He loved the days of bright clear blue, but the grey, wet skies with the heavy blankets of clouds that wept softly were the ones in which he thrived. For a moment he imagined his wooded mountains, a smoking waste like those of France. A shudder ran through him, and he chased the thought away, borrowing warmth from the fire and his coffee. Fortified by coffee, and with all the kinks stretched out of his joints, Blaine loaded his pack and gathered his weapons. He was unconvinced of the wisdom of carrying a rifle again, yet somehow, despite his memories, it was oddly comforting to have it along. They travelled beside the river all morning, following Ernest's best guess as to where the portents of the occasional broken twig, bent grass or trampled fern. They came across no more of the giant footprints. Blaine thought that was strange, given the steady rain that fell through the night. But it didn't seem to deter Ernest, which made him wonder if the old man was following a trail at all. Did he already know where they were going? Was the tracking all for show, or did the old Indian know something he didn't? When they stopped at noon to eat, Blaine broached the subject. Are you following a trail? He asked. I mean, are you actually tracking these things? Or do you know where they're going? Ernest gave him a satisfied smile that hinted at admiration, the kind of look he had forever tried to coax from his father. Never could. Both, he replied. There are signs, bits of hair caught on branches, tiny twigs broken too high for anything else to break in passing. But there is a legend about a place in the mountains. It may be nothing more than a legend. Still, it is worth looking into. All the old stories have truth tucked away inside of them, and Those passed down by the elders are always true. All I have to do is find a place I've only heard about. Simple as that. Were you ever going to tell me? No. Why should I? And you see, I didn't need to. So, I passed. You did. Now finish your food and let's get going. A few hours later, the trail turned away from the river and they began to climb into the mountains. They rounded a rock outcropping and Ernest thrust out a hand for him to stop. Advancing a few steps beyond the rock, he motioned for Blaine to come ahead. In the soft mud at the side of the trail was a footprint, and then another. So far, so good, Ernest said and then smiled at him. They followed the trail around a fallen log, this one to the right, completing an S in the path. Ernest pointed to a place where the trees were sparse. About 10 yards of the trail was a stump that stood as tall as Blaine. It wasn't a stump exactly. It was actually a broken tree. It was not a sapling. At the height of the break, it was a foot in diameter. 2 long pieces, broken from the tree, were crossed and wedged down into the broken stump to form a huge horizontal X. A pair of smaller trees nearby were bent to the stump and held there under the crossing branches of the X. What is this? Blaine said. That break looks fresh. Who would do something? Wait, did they do this? Ernest nodded in answer and slowly walked around the structure. Why? What is it? Blaine asked. Another warning. This one more serious, Ernest said softly. A boundary marker. Don't cross, Blaine finished for him. Yes, a wise man would heed it. Ernest cocked his head to look expectantly at Blaine. What do you want to do? You know, Ernest, I'm no fool, he answered. But I can't remember the last time I did what I really wanted to do. It's always been duty or family expectations or orders. I don't know what I want to do. I'm out of practice. But I do know this. We came to get the girl, and I'm not giving up. Not yet, anyway. Ernest gave him a quick nod of approval and tapped him on the shoulder as he went by. Come on then, we will be a story to tell by the campfire. He stopped and sighed. If only there were still campfires, and our people still sat around them. They left the trail at their back, and they were climbing then, winding their way up along a different game trail, and Blaine leaned forward into the hill as they went. The day had warmed, and sweat ran down his back and sides, marking its own trail on his shirt. His muscles sang with effort, and he panted as they went. He found himself silently thankful once more that the day was not one of the summer's clear, hot ones. He glanced up the trail at his partner. The old shopkeeper showed no signs of fatigue as he marched upwards with a fluid, graceful gait, slowing only to look back and make sure his young friend was still with him. When he reached the top, Blaine found Ernest sitting on a fallen tree, sipping water and looking serenely out over the forest below as he waited. Take a rest, Ernest said. It's downhill from here, at least until tomorrow. Oh, cheer up, you're not doing so bad. It's been a while, Blaine said between gulps of air. We're camped down there tonight. Pursing his lips, Ernest looked into the direction of the narrow valley behind him. Are we getting close? The old man simply shrugged and took a pull on his canteen. When they were 40 yards from the valley floor, Blaine could hear a stream tumbling down the mountain on their left. He caught glimpses of the setting sun on the water moving through the valley just below them, and while his eyes were elsewhere, he ran smack into Ernest's outstretched arm. The old man put a finger to his lips, eased off his pack, and slowly raised his weapon. Blaine jumped, startled, and jerked his head about, looking for the danger. And when he did, the buck broke cover where it didn't get far. The gun roared and bucked. The slug caught the deer behind the front quarter, where it bounded twice before crumpling to the ground. You take the packs down, Ernest said, drawing his knife and walking towards the deer. Get camp set up and Fire going. I'll address this and meet you there. Steak tonight, my boy." "You scared the crap out of me," Blaine scolded. "And it nearly cost us dinner," Ernest said with a laugh. "Fortunately, I am a good shot." Blaine took the packs down the hill and found a clearing near the stream, large enough to accommodate their tent and a fire. He scraped out a place in the sandy soil and piled stones from the stream in a circle. He gathered the pine needles and twigs for kindling and placed them in his pit. And after gathering wood for the night and getting a fire going, he strung a rope from which to pitch the shelter and got the canvas secured to the ground. He had a nice bed of coals in his pit by the time Ernest arrived, carried a leg joint and the back strap from his deer. They drove the pair of forked iron stakes tied to their packs into the ground at each end of the pit, and threading the tender meat on the back strap onto the metal skewer, they set it over the fire to roast, while they fashioned a wooden skewer for the leg that would take much longer to cook. And the moon was over the pines when a well-feasted Blaine squatted by the stream to wash the venison drippings from his hands. And while the water swirled through his fingers, he turned a watchful eye on the thick woods on the other side of the stream. And they had seen no tracks since leaving the strange structure on the far side of the mountain, and he had not felt the creeping sensation that accompanied the creature's presence. Still, he didn't relax his vigilance. Not that they had ever held an advantage, but they were in the Asiatics' home. Ernest had told him that the creatures were not trying to outdistance them. The Asiatic were keeping an eye on them while going about their life as usual. This deep into the woods, Blaine's worries over if they found Lily and the Asiatic were morphing into worries about what would happen when they found them. He did not understand where the certainty came from, but he was sure they were close. Chapter 8. Blaine's worries over the future, overruled by aching muscles and a bulging stomach, did not keep him awake that night. He lay atop his blankets and plunged into a dreamless sleep, with barely a thought that his worries might come looking for him. A rough shake of his shoulder brought Blaine to wakefulness. His brain still fuzzy with sleep, he scrubbed his hand over his face. And by the dim light of the dying fire that came through the open end of the tent, he could see Ernest on his knees beside him. The storekeeper maintained a tight grip on his arm. He signaled for quiet as he reached beneath his blankets for the shotgun with the other hand. Blaine could not make out the anxious expression on his partner's face. There was no need to ask the cause. He could feel it. They had visitors. He sat up and pulled on his boots. He was reaching for his weapon when a twig snapped just beyond the rear of the tent. "I'm going out and I'll build up the fire," Ernest whispered. The move surprised Blaine. Ernest had always been content to sit tight and let them look and go away of their own accord. He nodded, drew the Colt from its holster, and covered the back of the tent, while Ernest crawled out at the front. Ernest used the iron skewer resting on the fire ring to stir the embers, and without taking his eyes off the surrounding forest, he threw a few small sticks on the fire. The fire began to grow, and he followed the small pieces of wood with a couple of larger ones. The firelight pushed the darkness out of camp. Ernest walked the perimeter in a slow circle. As he did, Blaine went out to join him by the fire. The flames leaped up to dance a couple of feet above the stones, flooding the camp with flickering light. Ernest grabbed Blaine's arm and turned him around. Above the peak of their tent, a pair of eyes glowed in the dark. Blaine reached for his rifle, and when he did, the perimeter of the camp came alive with glowing eyes and hulking silhouettes. Something heavy splashed in the stream behind them, and Blaine turned to see an 8-foot tall shadow standing in the water. He inched closer to Ernest, putting a fire between him and the creature in the stream. "What now?" he whispered. "Slowly put down your rifle," Ernest said, stooping to lay his shotgun on the ground. "What? Are you crazy? Maybe, but we can't kill them all. I'm going to try and talk to them. Legend says they speak all the Salish tongues." And Blaine lowered his weapon. his hand trembling as he bent to place it on the ground beside Ernest's shotgun. He slowly rose, holding his head and shoulders as high as he could. Ernest took a small step forward. The creature behind their tent took a long sidestep, followed by the monster's stride forward into the firelight to meet him. Ernest raised a hand in greeting that went unacknowledged. "No trouble," he said in Fuana, and slowly raised the other hand. "The girl's mother weeps." Dread crept over Blaine as the creature responded with only an angry stare. "This is it," he thought. "This is where we die." The tension in the air crackled with unseen electricity. He fought back the urge to reach for the rifle. His willingness to die at the creature's hands a few weeks back had left him somewhere along the way. The old familiar fear of going over the top had found him again. His knees felt like rubber. His mouth was dry. After an eternity, the creature raised a massive hand, and he pointed at Blaine, whose heart skipped a beat at the sight of the finger with the long, dirty, hooked nail extended his way. It nearly stopped beating when the creature spoke.
"Has the Haunted One come to curse us?"
Ernest's head swiveled between Blaine and the Seatic, a look of quizzical wonder on his face. "He is a warrior of great battles," Ernest said. "War haunts him. He means you no harm. He asks for the girl." The giant lumbered to within his long arm's reach of Blaine. His black eyes looked into the man's, and Blaine could feel the creature's strength radiating from it as it studied his face.
"Why do you want the female?"
the creature said. The stench of its breath was nauseating. Blaine couldn't see Ernest. The creature was between them. He could only hope his partner felt his hopeless confusion and would answer for him. "The haunted warrior doesn't speak the language of the people. I understand some, but doesn't know how to speak," Ernest said. Raising his voice, he went on. "Blaine, why do you want the girl? Answer him. I'll translate." "Tell him it's because they took her," he said to the creature. "She's not game. She has the soul power and must choose where she goes." "Thank God you listen well," Ernest mumbled. "I'll tell him, but I don't think he'll understand." Ernest rattled off a string of words that Blaine couldn't follow. The Seatic turned to stare at Ernest, but did not move from his place. When the shopkeeper finished speaking, the creature shook his head in a gesture Blaine recognized. Ernest was right. It didn't understand. The Seatic ran a gigantic hand over its face twice, brushing away confusion. Blaine decided to try again. "You go where you will, Seatic," he said. "She must too. Let her choose where to live. If she goes with you, well. If not, you must let her go." Ernest translated. A moment later, the Seatic slammed a fist on his thigh, turned an angry stare at Blaine, and finally stalked off into the trees. Reappeared seconds later, with the girl draped over one massive shoulder. He dropped her on a heap near the fire, swung an enormous arm Blaine's way, and mumbled something at her. "I'll be darned," Ernest said. "He just told her to choose." Her eyes never leaving her captor, the girl got slowly to her feet, her body trembling for a minute or two, while both sides watched her. When she seemed to make sense that the creature would make no move towards her, she ran to stand behind Blaine. The Seatic charged Blaine with a fire in his eyes. Then he pulled up short, a foot away, bent to look the haunted warrior in the face, huffed out a sharp breath, and tapped Blaine on the chest with the back of his hand. The tap sent Blaine stumbling back a step. The creature wheeled about, stomped to the edge of the camp, where it snapped off a pair of branches above the tent. It handed them to Ernest with a grunt, and it pointed to the mountain and said a few jumbled words to Ernest. Let's get out of here, now," Ernest said. He held up the broken limbs. "These are for torches. Yeah, you got the gesture. He wants us out of here." They reached the Sasquatch River as dawn set the sky ablaze. Reds and gold streaked the heavens over the tops of the pines and chased the night down the western horizon. The day was new, but the trekkers were spent, and they collapsed on a wide spit of dry sand. Let's get a couple of hours of sleep," Ernest said. "We can press on the potlatch later." He got no argument from either of his companions. They ate leftover bread from the pack and drank from the river. Despite Blaine's efforts to engage her in conversation, Lily had not spoken since she had joined them. She would accept water or food when offered, but said nothing. Blaine thought he knew why. He had gone through a time when speaking was an effort not worth trying. He didn't pressure her. After they had eaten, Blaine laid out half of their canvas shelter for Lily to lie down on, and he found a place to curl up on the sand a few feet away. Ernest propped himself against a nearby tree, and in minutes they were all asleep. Sometime later, Blaine awakened to the realization that his world had changed while he slept. He kept his eyes closed while he studied the changes. He had grown a coarse canvas covering, and along with it came a soft, warm body pressed tightly against his. A tiny piece of driftwood he ignored earlier, when he chose the spot, was biting into the small of his back. And while he slept, a pebble had worked his way up through the sand to torment his right shoulder. Neither of these were unpleasant enough to make him move away from the softness next to him. However, another sensation could finally coax him to get up. It was the rich aroma of coffee. He opened his eyes and lifted his head to look about for the source of the enticing scent. Ernest was crouched over a small fire, a steaming pot in his hand. "Comfortable?" he asked, without turning to look at Blaine. "Moderately," he replied, sitting up. "Not enough to stay here while there's coffee, though." He carefully extricated himself from under the canvas without apparently waking the girl beside him, and stood for a moment looking down at her. The features of her face were as delicate as the feel of her body. When was the last time I really looked at a woman? He wondered. "Good. We should move soon," Ernest said, bringing him back to the present. "Looks like you made a friend." "What? Oh, Lily," Blaine said. "I suppose, but she probably got cold." Maybe," Ernest said with a chuckle. "Maybe." An hour later they were moving back down the river. They no longer felt threatened by the Seatic who might be behind them. They kept a steady pace nonetheless, pushed on by the urgency to see the incident over with and return to their normal lives. It was well after dark by the time they crossed the plank bridge and dragged themselves into the Dacus dooryard. "Ho! In the house!" Ernest shouted as they approached. They waited in the yard for a light to appear inside. The flickering light of a lamp filled the window. The door opened slowly, throwing a rectangle of light onto the ground at their feet. "That's Ernest," he called out. "We have Lily." A shrill scream of delight answered him from within. The girl's mother bolted from her home to wrap the child in an embrace that, despite the mother's small stature, lifted Lily from her feet. The woman dissolved into tears, and Lily was whisked away inside. Tears stood in her father's eyes as he came to wrap his arms around Ernest and shake Blaine's hand. I can never thank you enough," he said. "You have given my life back to me." There's no need for thanks," Ernest said. "We were able to help, and Lily is safe. She had a terrible scare, though. It is thanks enough that you love her and care for her now, and tell her mother that she may not want to talk for a while, and that is okay." "I'll tell her," he promised. "Will you come in?" No," Ernest told him. "I don't know about this young man, but this old man needs sleep. We'll just camp out here." We're fine," Blaine added. "Go see about your daughter." When the man had gone inside, Ernest turned to Blaine and laid a hand on his shoulder. "Do you want to be around here in the morning?" "Not really," Blaine said. "You will miss a huge feast and equally tremendous outpouring of thanks." Yeah, that's okay," Blaine said. "The company store is the only one who will profit from that." I ain't much good at people fawning over me like I did something special, Ernest said. Are you? No, Blaine said with a shake of his head. Not good with that at all. Besides, I gotta get home and then get to Olympia tomorrow. I'll wake you before dawn, Ernest said. Alice will be awake and cooking, but I think we can slip away unnoticed. I'm all for that, Blaine told him. While they slept, the sky turned a washed-out grey. They arose. Blaine shook Ernest's hand and would have promised to see him on the next trip to Hoodsport, if he still had the job. With a confident smile, Ernest said he would have dinner ready when Blaine brought the beer. They left the little white house behind. Ernest turned north towards Hoodsport, and Blaine turned south to shelter. He had not gone far, only as far as the old plank bridge that figured so prominently in his life, when he heard footsteps behind him. He glanced over his shoulder. A finger of ice stabbed at his heart as a dark silhouette came running up the road towards him. The fear vanished as quickly as it had appeared. It was far too small to be a threat. When it waved to him, he turned and returned the wave and waited. Lily's face grew out of the morning darkness as she drew nearer. When she reached him, she laid a hand flat against his chest and looked up into his eyes. Without a word, she stood on tiptoes and kissed him. The kiss was no more than a flash brushing of lips, forming an unforgettable moment in time. I choose you, she said, and turning, she fled. He stood there watching her, feeling the beating beneath the place where her hand had lain. Wow. And another one, wow. Absolutely awesome, as it always is with the incredible mind of Jack LaFountain. Don't forget guys, this is a 4-part story, bringing an element of the seasons into each one. Why not show some love and support for Jack's incredible work and click the link, of which I'll leave in the description box below. That'll take you over to Jack's incredible Amazon bookstore. There you can buy this, plus any other stories that I have covered on the show, such as Death Rides the Red and Myuu Moon, plus many more. Of course, as ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. If you're an aspiring writer or just want to have a crack at things like myself, then please do get in touch with me at the usual email as on screen, which is dmtforestofear@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. Hope everybody's well and happy this week, having a great week at school, work, studying, whatever it is that you do, and you're trying to keep fit and focused during these testing times. But above all guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.